Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to tackle this whole cannabis rescheduling thing.
Yeah, it's getting pretty heated.
It's way more than just like science or public health, though, right? It feels like it's about who has the power.
Totally. There are some pretty serious accusations flying around, especially at the DEA.
Oh, yeah, about like colluding with those anti-cannabis groups.
Exactly. People are saying they're way too close to smart approaches to marijuana.
Ah, Sam.
Yeah, Sam. And when you see who they've invited to these rescheduling hearings, it kind of makes you wonder.
Like they want to stack the deck.
It seems that way. They've got all these prohibitionist voices lined up.
But they're shutting out folks who actually support cannabis reform.
Like, for example, Colorado. They were totally denied a spot.
Seriously.
Yeah. They've been leading the way on legalization, and the DEA just said, nope.
Wow. But then a state like Nebraska gets an invite.
Yep.
That's wild.
It really is. And it's not just about who's in and who's out either.
Right, they're being super secretive about the whole process, too.
The DEA hasn't released the full list of who even asked to participate.
So how are we supposed to know if they're making decisions fairly?
Exactly. It's a total lack of transparency, which seems to be a pretty clear violation of the Administrative Procedure Act.
The APA.
Yeah, it's all about how federal agencies should make decisions, and transparency is like key.
So they're not just messing with cannabis policy. They could be messing with how the government works.
Potentially, yeah. And then there's this whole thing with Attorney General Merrick Garland signing the rescheduling notice.
I heard about that. That's weird, right? Usually that's the DEA administrator's job.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder if the DEA is trying to distance themselves from this whole mess.
Because they know it's controversial.
Yeah, especially after they spent years denying the science on cannabis's medical benefits.
Like they're trying to wash their hands of it.
Kind of, but it doesn't really work that way, does it? You can't just ignore years of research and then pretend you're suddenly open-minded.
Right. And speaking of ignoring the science, what about Dr. Sue Sisley?
Oh, yeah. She's a super well-respected cannabis researcher focusing on PTSD treatment, especially for veterans.
Her work is incredible, and yet she was excluded from the hearings.
It's strange, right? But they invite groups like Sam who just spread fear and misinformation.
Instead of actual facts.
Right. It's clear the DEA is putting their agenda before science and potentially hurting people who could benefit from medical cannabis.
And isn't the president of SAM, Kevin Sambit, bragging about his influence on the DEA?
Oh, yeah. He keeps talking about his inside track and his friends in low places.
Doesn't that raise some red flags about maybe breaking the rules, like those APA violations we talked about?
Absolutely. It sounds a lot like ex parte communication, which is basically having secret conversations with decision makers to try and sway things in your favor.
So it's like one side gets to whisper in the judge's ear, and the other side doesn't even know it's happening.
Exactly. It totally undermines the fairness of the whole thing.
So to recap, we've got the DEA, the agency that's supposed to be evaluating cannabis, possibly colluding with anti-cannabis groups, silencing legitimate researchers, and potentially breaking the rules for fair decision-making.
It's a pretty troubling picture. It makes you wonder, if this is how they handle something like cannabis, what else are they doing behind closed doors? It's a scary thought, really. I mean, what does all this mean for the future of cannabis in the U.S.?
Yeah, what happens next with all this rescheduling stuff? It's got to have a big impact, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're not just talking about some theoretical legal debate here. This affects real people's lives.
Patients, researchers, businesses.
Everyone, really.
Yeah.
Even the criminal justice system is going to feel it.
So break it down for me. What would it actually mean if they reschedule cannabis to Schedule 3?
Okay, well, first of all, it would at least be an acknowledgement that cannabis has medical value.
Which, the DEA has been fighting against forever.
Right. So that's a big step.
But wouldn't it still be illegal at the federal level?
Yeah, it would. Schedule 3 doesn't change that. And each state would still have their own regulations to deal with.
So kind of complicated still.
Oh, definitely. But it could open some doors for research.
And maybe make it a little easier for patients to get access to cannabis-based medicine.
Exactly.
I guess it's a step in the right direction. But I've heard some folks saying that we need to go further, like completely deschedule cannabis.
Yeah, a lot of people are pushing for that.
So what would that look like?
Basically, it would be like alcohol or tobacco. The feds would be hands-off, and the states would decide how to regulate it.
More states' rights.
Right.
But let's be real. The DEA doesn't exactly seem thrilled about giving up control, do they?
True, it would be a huge shift. But things are changing, Public opinion is on our side.
More and more people are supporting cannabis reform.
Exactly. And more states are legalizing it, whether the federal government likes it or not.
It's almost like this tug-of-war, right?
Mhm.
The feds on one side, the states on the other, and the people are stuck in the middle.
And meanwhile, people are using cannabis anyway, legally or not.
It shows you how out of touch the federal government really is, doesn't it?
Totally. So there are a lot of different perspectives on this whole rescheduling debate.
Like people who support it versus people who are against it.
Yeah, strong arguments on both sides. The folks who are for rescheduling, they see it as a compromise.
A way to at least get the ball rolling.
Yeah, they think it's a way to acknowledge the medical benefits of cannabis, but still keep some federal oversight.
To make sure things don't get out of hand.
Right. They believe it could lead to more research funding, too.
And hopefully help reduce criminal penalties for simple possession.
Exactly. On the other side, you've got people who think rescheduling isn't enough.
Like it's just a Band-Aid on a bigger problem.
Yeah. They argue that as long as cannabis is scheduled at all, even Schedule 3, it keeps that stigma attached to it.
Makes it seem like it's dangerous or something.
Right. They see it as government overreach, plain and simple. They think people should have the freedom to choose, you know?
Especially when it comes to personal use.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of growing your own.
Ah, yeah. That's a big one for a lot of people.
It's a matter of principle for them, you know?
Like a religious freedom thing?
Right. They see it as a fundamental right, and they worry that rescheduling could just benefit big pharma.
Leaving the little guys behind.
Yep. So you see, it's really complex, and we can't forget about the potential legal challenges either.
Oh, right. We were talking about the DEA maybe violating the APA.
If they did break the rules, it could throw the whole rescheduling process into chaos.
Like a legal nightmare.
Pretty much. So, yeah, lots of uncertainty right now. But it's important to remember the people at the heart of this debate.
The patients, the advocates, the everyday folks who use cannabis.
Exactly. Their lives are being affected by these decisions. We can't lose sight of that.
It's a lot to think about, that's for sure. But like, what does all this mean for the average person? You know, the people who are actually using cannabis.
Well, if we're talking about patients who use cannabis for medical reasons, rescheduling to Schedule 3 could be pretty significant.
It could actually make a difference for them.
Potentially, yeah. It could make it easier for them to get access to cannabis-derived medicine.
And hopefully more research too, right? To really understand how it can help.
Exactly. And it could also help reduce some of the stigma around using cannabis for medical purposes.
It shouldn't be taboo to talk about, right? Especially if it's helping people manage their health conditions.
Right. No one should feel ashamed for seeking relief.
And what about the impact on the criminal justice system? That feels like a huge part of this whole debate.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about all the people who are incarcerated for cannabis offenses.
It's crazy, right?
Rescheduling could lead to a reduction in arrests and prosecutions.
So law enforcement could focus on more serious crimes.
Exactly. And it could also help address some of the racial disparities in cannabis enforcement.
Oh, yeah, because we know communities of color have been disproportionately targeted.
It's a major social justice issue. So yeah, rescheduling could be a step towards a more equitable system.
But it's just a step, right? It's not like it solves everything.
Right. Cannabis would still be federally illegal.
So there's still work to do.
Definitely. And what about those folks who use cannabis for, like, personal or spiritual reasons?
Yeah. What happens to them?
Well, rescheduling wouldn't necessarily change things much for them.
They'd still face legal risks.
Potentially. And it wouldn't really address that whole debate about the right to grow your own.
Which is so important to a lot of people.
They see it as a fundamental right connected to their freedom of religion and personal autonomy.
And it kind of highlights how divided we are on this whole issue, right?
Yeah.
You've got public opinion shifting towards legalization. You've got states doing their own thing.
And then you have the federal government still holding on to these outdated policies.
It's like we're living in two different worlds.
Yeah, it creates so much confusion and uncertainty,
Yeah.
especially for businesses trying to navigate this patchwork of laws.
And then there's the economic side of it, too.
Oh, yeah. Think about all the potential revenue and job creation that's being stifled.
It's mind-blowing. But honestly, it feels like this is about so much more than just money.
Totally. This is about personal freedom. It's about bodily autonomy. It's about people having the right to make their own choices.
Exactly. And it's about holding our government accountable, making sure they're listening to the people.
It feels like we're at a real turning point.
And who knows what the future holds. But one thing's for sure, this conversation about cannabis is far from over.
Definitely not.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the legal battles to the personal stories to the larger societal implications. And we hope you'll keep thinking about these issues, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a more just and equitable world. Because in the end, that's what it's all about, right?